The sound of fine china shattering against marble floors still echoes in my dreams. But it wasn't the breaking that changed everything. It was what my stepmother said next. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 23 years, I believed that love meant enduring, that family meant sacrifice. That being the daughter of Charleston's most respected antiquities dealer meant swallowing your voice until it disappeared entirely. I was wrong about all of it. The evening it all began, I sat at our family's dining table in the Vance estate, a sprawling antebellum mansion on the historic district's most coveted street. The chandelier above us cost more than most people's cars, casting prismatic light across the table, set with my late father's favorite porcelain. Genevieve, my stepmother, sat at the head of the table like a queen presiding over her court. My younger half-brother Owen sat to her right, his eyes fixed on his phone, oblivious as always. The air felt thick, suffocating despite the high ceilings and the gentle whir of the ceiling fans. I'd learned to recognize that particular quality of tension, the way the atmosphere shifted when Genevieve was building toward something. It was like watching storm clouds gather on a summer afternoon, knowing the lightning was inevitable but never quite sure where it would strike. I should have known that night would be different. There were signs, small tells I'd learned to read over the years. The way she'd arranged the seating, placing me directly across from her. The particular set of her jaw. The way she'd dismissed the staff early, insisting we needed family time. In the Vance household, family time was never a good thing. We were halfway through the main course when Genevieve's eyes fixed on me with that particular gleam I'd come to dread. She'd been making small cuts all evening, little remarks about my appearance, my career choices, my failure to live up to the Vance name. I'd absorbed each one silently, as I always did, waiting for the meal to end so I could retreat to my apartment across town. But then she said it. The words that would crack open everything I'd been holding inside for so long. You know, Eleanor, your father would be so disappointed to see what you've become. A mediocre art appraiser, living in that tiny apartment, no prospects, no husband. Sometimes I wonder if he regretted having you at all. The room went silent. Even Owen looked up from his phone. I felt something inside me crystallize, sharp and cold. My father had died 3 years ago, and Genevieve had wasted no time in making it clear that my place in this family was provisional at best. But she'd never gone quite this far. I opened my mouth to respond, though I'm not sure what I would have said. It didn't matter. Genevieve wasn't finished. She picked up the ornate butter knife beside her plate, the one from the 18th century French silver set my father had acquired in Paris. With deliberate slowness, she used it to sweep my dinner plate off the table. The crash was spectacular. The porcelain shattered into a dozen pieces, sending my carefully prepared meal sliding across the pristine marble floor. A small decorative piece from the plate's edge broke off and skittered toward my feet. "If you want to eat," Genevieve said, her voice dripping with contempt, "crawl down there and lick it up, you worthless thing." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Owen's face had gone pale, but he said nothing. He never did. My stepmother's eyes bored into mine, waiting for me to do what I always did. Apologize. Clean up. Disappear. Instead, I bent down slowly and picked up that small broken piece of porcelain. It was sharp against my palm as I closed my fingers around it. I looked at each person in that room, my gaze finally settling on Genevieve with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. "You're going to regret teaching me how to pick up broken pieces, Mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of years of suppressed rage. I stood, and instead of running away as I had so many times before, I walked. Slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking against the marble floor with each step, crushing the remnants of my ruined dinner beneath expensive shoes. I didn't look back. I didn't hurry. I walked out of that dining room like I was walking off a battlefield I'd already won. The door closed behind me with a satisfying finality, leaving them in stunned silence. That night, sitting in my car in the circular driveway, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I looked at that piece of broken porcelain in my hand, a small shard of painted china that had survived my father's death, my stepmother's cruelty, and my own cowardice. The city of Charleston stretched out before me, with its cobblestone streets and historic homes, its oak trees draped in Spanish moss, its carefully preserved facades hiding so many secrets. This city had been my gilded prison for too long. Now, it would become my battlefield. My phone rang before I even made it home. Owen's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "You made Mom upset again," he said without preamble. His voice carried that particular whine he'd perfected over the years, the sound of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. You know how fragile she is. Do you know what she sacrificed for this family? For you? I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Yes, Owen. I know exactly what she sacrificed. And I know exactly what she's taken. You'll find out soon enough. I hung up before he could respond. But I wasn't done. Not even close. 40 minutes later, I was standing on Owen's doorstep in the trendy downtown loft he'd bought with money from our father's estate. Money that Genevieve controlled. Money that should have been divided equally but somehow always seemed to flow more generously toward her biological son. Owen opened the door looking confused and annoyed. Before he could speak, I pushed past him and dropped a manila folder on his pristine glass coffee table. Photographs spilled out. Pictures I'd been collecting for months. Images of antiques that should have been in our father's collection but weren't. Receipts from auction houses. Blurry shots I'd taken of items I recognized in various estate sales around the city. What is this? Owen asked, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. That's the Meissen vase Dad bought in Berlin. That's the Georgian silver tea service from his London trip. That's the Japanese screen he spent 2 years authenticating. I pointed to each photograph. They're all gone, Owen. Sold. And there are more, so many more. Owen's face had gone from annoyed to confused to something approaching fear. Mom wouldn't she? I cut him off. She's been systematically liquidating Dad's collection for 3 years. Selling pieces, hiding the money, claiming they were donated or lost or never existed. While you've been living off trust fund money and I've been scraping by on my appraiser's salary, she's been stealing our inheritance. I watched the information filter through his mind, saw the moment doubt crept in. Owen wasn't stupid, just willfully blind. He'd needed to believe in Genevieve because the alternative, that our family was built on lies and cruelty, was too much to face. I don't believe you, he said, but his conviction was wavering. You don't have to believe me yet, I said, gathering the photos, but you will. The next morning, I was sitting in the office of Sterling and Associates, one of Charleston's most prestigious law firms. Judge Patricia Sterling, recently retired and now focusing on estate law, looked over the documents I'd brought with a practiced eye. I'd been gathering evidence for months, ever since I'd accidentally noticed one of my father's favorite pieces in a consignment shop window and started asking questions. This is quite extensive, Judge Sterling said, her silver hair catching the morning light streaming through the tall windows. You have receipts, photographs, witness statements. But you'll need more to prove systematic fraud. Do you have access to your father's estate records? Genevieve handles everything, I said. She's the executor. She has all the original documentation. Judge Sterling nodded slowly. Then we'll need to get creative. You're an appraiser, correct? You have access to auction house records, provenance databases? I straightened in my chair. Yes, I can track every piece my father ever purchased. He was meticulous about documentation. Good. Start there. And Eleanor? She paused, her keen eyes meeting mine. Be prepared for this to get ugly. Family matters always do. I thought about the broken porcelain on Genevieve's dining room floor, about years of small cruelties and casual dismissals. It's already ugly, Judge Sterling. I'm just making sure everyone else can see it too. Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed. I cross-referenced my father's acquisition records with current auction listings. I called in favors from colleagues in the antiques world. I spent hours in dusty archives and online databases, and slowly, a picture emerged. Genevieve had been clever. She hadn't sold everything at once. She'd been strategic, moving pieces through different channels. High-value items went to private collectors. Mid-range pieces showed up at auction houses in other states. Smaller items appeared in consignment shops and estate sales, always just far enough from Charleston to avoid immediate recognition. But she'd made mistakes. The same ones criminals always make when they think they're smarter than everyone else. She'd gotten greedy, she'd gotten careless, and she'd underestimated me. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon. I was following up on a lead about a Louis XVI writing desk that my father had cherished. The trail led me to a modest antique market on the outskirts of town, far from the upscale galleries Genevieve usually frequented, the kind of place where cash transactions were preferred and questions weren't asked. I almost didn't see her. Genevieve, dressed down in clothes I'd never seen her wear, was in the back corner, haggling over a small bronze sculpture that I immediately recognized. It had sat on my father's desk for years, a Tang Dynasty piece he'd acquired in Beijing. She was trying to sell it, her voice low, her demeanor nothing like the imperious woman who'd humiliated me at dinner. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Every word, every gesture. The way the dealer counted out cash. The way Genevieve quickly stuffed it into her purse, glancing around nervously. She didn't see me, hidden behind a display of Victorian furniture. When she left, I approached the dealer. He was an older man, weathered and cautious. "That bronze she just sold you," I said quietly. "It's stolen property." His eyes widened, and I saw him calculating his options. "I don't know what you're talking about." I showed him my phone, the video still playing. "You don't have to be involved in this. Just tell me how many times she's been here, what else she sold. And this?" I gestured to the bronze. "I'll buy it back, for twice what you paid." Money talks, especially in the antiques trade. An hour later, I walked out with the bronze sculpture and a handwritten list of every item Genevieve had sold through that dealer. It was more than I'd hoped for, much more, but I needed more. I needed something that would be undeniable, something she couldn't talk her way out of. I needed her to expose herself. The Palmetto Society's annual charity gala was Charleston's social event of the season. Old money, new money, and those desperately trying to pretend they belonged all gathered at the historic Hibernian Hall. Genevieve was on the planning committee, naturally. She loved these events, loved playing the role of grieving widow who dedicated herself to charitable causes in her late husband's memory. I bought a ticket, despite knowing I wasn't really welcome. I wore a dress my father had bought me years ago, emerald green silk that he'd said brought out my eyes. I wanted him there with me, in some small way, for what I was about to do. Genevieve was holding court near the bar, surrounded by Charleston's elite, telling some story about her latest philanthropic endeavor. She was using my father's memory, as always, to burnish her own reputation, talking about his generosity, his passion for preserving history, his dedication to the community. I waited for the right moment, when the crowd around her was at its thickest, when the most influential people in Charleston were hanging on her every word. Then I walked up, my voice clear and steady. "Mother, I'm so glad to hear you talking about Dad's generosity." Heads turned. Genevieve's smile froze on her face. "I've been curious, though. How do you explain the items from his collection that you've been selling? The pieces you've been moving through back-alley dealers and out-of-state auction houses? How does that honor his memory exactly?" The silence that fell was absolute. I could see the calculation in Genevieve's eyes, the split-second decision about how to respond. She chose anger. "How dare you?" She hissed, then her voice rose. "How dare you come here and make these accusations, after everything I've done for you, after I took you in when you had no one else?" "I had my father," I said quietly, "until you systematically erased everything he built. Tell me, do all these people know about the consignment shops? The private sales? The thousands of dollars you've hidden from the estate?" Genevieve's hand flew up and connected with my cheek. The slap echoed through the hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my hand to my stinging face. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and let everyone see what was happening. "Is that your answer, Mother? Violence?" My voice carried to every corner of the room. "Is that what you do when someone tells the truth?" She tried to salvage it, tried to play the victim. "You ungrateful, delusional girl. You're making up stories because you're jealous, because you've never measured up." "I have proof," I said simply. "Receipts, photographs, video of you selling Dad's Tang Dynasty bronze for cash at a second-rate antique market. Witness statements from dealers. Bank records showing deposits that don't match any legitimate transactions. Judge Sterling has already reviewed everything. The only question is whether you want to address this privately or if you'd prefer it all to come out in court." The color drained from Genevieve's face. Around us, Charleston's social elite were pulling out their phones, no doubt texting about the scandal unfolding before their eyes. The Vance family, so carefully curated, so meticulously presented, was crumbling in real time. I turned and walked away, leaving Genevieve standing in the wreckage of her reputation. My cheek still burned where she'd struck me, but I'd never felt more powerful. The next morning, my phone rang at 7. It was Owen. "I need to see everything," he said without preamble. His voice sounded different, older, somehow. "Tired, all of it. The proof you mentioned, I need to know." We met at a coffee shop downtown, away from prying eyes. I spread out the documents I'd compiled over months of investigation. Owen went through each one methodically, his face growing more ashen with every page. Financial records showing Genevieve moving money through shell accounts. Inventory lists of items sold with values far below market rate, photographs of pieces that should have been in climate-controlled storage appearing in dingy shop windows. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. "I started suspecting about 6 months after Dad died. I started investigating 4 months ago. I've been building a case for 2 months." Owen was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "She told me you were the problem, that you were greedy, that you were trying to take what wasn't yours. I believed her." "She's very good at making people believe her," I said, and I found I didn't hate him anymore. Owen wasn't evil, just weak. A grown man who'd never learned to see past his mother's manipulation. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I gathered the documents, sliding them back into their folder. "I'm going to make sure she faces consequences. Legal ones. I'm going to get back what she stole, what belonged to Dad, what should have been ours. And I'm going to make sure she can never do this to anyone else." Owen nodded slowly. Then he said something that surprised me. "I want to help. I want to testify. I've seen things, heard things over the years. I didn't put it together until now, but I can corroborate some of this. And I have access to documents, records she doesn't know I've seen." I studied my half-brother's face, looking for the trap, the angle. But all I saw was genuine remorse and, perhaps for the first time, courage. "Why?" I asked. "Because she lied to me too. Because I'm tired of being her puppet. Because Dad deserved better." He paused. "Because you deserved better." 1 week later, we sat in Judge Sterling's office again. This time, Owen was with me. The evidence spread across her desk was damning. Financial records Owen had secretly copied, emails he'd found in Genevieve's private files, conversations he'd recorded on his phone when he'd started asking her pointed questions, conversations where she'd contradicted her own story, where she'd let slip details about sales and transactions she'd claimed never happened. "This is more than enough," Judge Sterling said, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the latest documents. "Fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty as executor. The district attorney will be very interested in this." "I don't just want a settlement," I said. "I want a trial. I want it on record. I want everyone to know what she did." Judge Sterling looked at me over her glasses. "Are you sure? Trials are public. Messy. The media attention will be intense." "Good," I said. "Let them see. Let everyone see who Genevieve Vance really is." The filing of the lawsuit made the local news within hours. By evening, it was the lead story on every Charleston station. By the next morning, it had been picked up by regional outlets. The Vance family scandal was officially public. Genevieve hired the best lawyers money could buy, of course. She put out statements about how this was all a misunderstanding, how she was being victimized by an ungrateful stepdaughter and a mentally unstable son. She played the grieving widow card, the devoted mother card, every card she could think of. But the evidence didn't care about her narrative, and slowly, other things started to emerge. People who'd been afraid to speak up before suddenly found their voices. Other dealers who'd facilitated questionable sales. Friends of my father who'd noticed pieces missing and been told convenient lies. Even some of Genevieve's so-called charity work came under scrutiny, with questions raised about where certain donations had actually gone. The trial date was set for 3 months out. Those months were brutal. Genevieve's lawyers tried every tactic they could think of. Motions to dismiss, attempts to seal records, character assassination in the press. But Judge Sterling and the legal team she'd assembled were ready for all of it. I went to work every day at the appraisal firm, trying to maintain some normalcy. But Charleston is a small city in the ways that matter, and everywhere I went, I could feel the eyes, hear the whispers. Some people treated me like a hero, others like a traitor. The Vance name had power in this city, and I was dismantling it brick by brick. Through it all, Owen stood firm. He'd moved out of his loft and into a modest apartment, living off his own salary for the first time in his life. We met for coffee weekly, and I watched him transform from a spoiled mama's boy into something resembling an actual adult. He was in therapy, he told me, working through years of manipulation and enmeshment. It was strange, developing a relationship with my half-brother after all these years of distance. But there was something clean about it, something honest that had never existed before. The trial began on a humid June morning. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, curious onlookers. I wore a simple navy suit, my father's watch on my wrist. Owen wore the tie Dad had given him for his college graduation. Genevieve arrived like she was attending a society luncheon, dressed in designer black with pearls, playing the widow card to the last. Her lawyers surrounded her, a wall of expensive suits and briefcases. The courtroom was packed. I recognized faces from Charleston society, from the art world, from my father's old circles. Everyone wanted to see how this would play out. The prosecution, led by a sharp young district attorney named Martinez, laid out the case methodically. Detailed financial records showing systematic looting of the estate, expert testimony from appraisers about the value of missing pieces, paper trails showing money moving through accounts, being hidden, being laundered through fake charitable donations. And then came the witnesses. Dealers who'd bought pieces from Genevieve, who testified to cash transactions and false provenances. An accountant who'd quietly quit working for Genevieve when he'd noticed irregularities. Even some of Charleston's social elite, forced to admit they'd purchased items from her private collection, items she'd claimed were legally hers to sell. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my head high. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. And then I did. I told them about years of verbal abuse, of being made to feel worthless, of watching my father's legacy be systematically dismantled. I described finding that first piece in the consignment shop window, the shock of recognition, the beginning of understanding. I walked them through months of investigation, of tracking down items, of building the case piece by piece. I told them about the dinner, about the plate smashed to the floor, about being told to crawl and lick up my food like a dog. The courtroom was silent. Even Genevieve's lawyers looked uncomfortable. "And how did that make you feel?" Martinez asked gently. "Like I was finally done being invisible," I said. "Like I was ready to fight back." Cross-examination was brutal. Genevieve's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Caldwell, tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone motivated by greed and jealousy rather than justice. He brought up every mistake I'd ever made, every argument I'd ever had with Genevieve, trying to make me seem unstable. But I'd been preparing for this. I stayed calm. I answered every question directly, and when he tried to twist my words, I called him on it. "Mr. Caldwell," I said at one point, "you can try to make this about my character all you want. But the evidence speaks for itself. The missing items, the secret sales, the hidden accounts, that's not about me. That's about what your client did." Then it was Owen's turn. I watched my half-brother walk to the stand, and I saw Genevieve's face crumble for the first time. This was the betrayal she hadn't seen coming. Her own son, her golden child, testifying against her. Owen's testimony was devastating. He described conversations he'd overheard, documents he'd seen, inconsistencies in her stories. He talked about how she'd manipulated him, used his love for her to keep him compliant and blind. He admitted his own complicity, his willful ignorance, and took responsibility for it. "She's my mother," he said at one point, his voice breaking. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But Eleanor was right. Dad deserved better. The truth deserves better. Genevieve's lawyers tried to discredit him too, suggesting he'd been coerced by me, that he was mentally unstable, that this was sibling rivalry taken to extremes. But Owen held firm. For the first time in his life, he didn't back down. When Genevieve took the stand in her own defense, it was like watching a performance. She cried. She claimed confusion. She insisted everything she'd done was legal, that she'd been trying to preserve the estate, that she was being persecuted by ungrateful children who didn't understand the sacrifices she'd made. But Martinez was ready. He walked her through transaction after transaction, forcing her to explain each one. He showed her videos of her selling items in cash transactions. He confronted her with her own emails, her own words contradicting her testimony. I watched her facade crack, watched the polished veneer begin to chip away. When she started to lose her temper, snapping at Martinez, the jury saw it. The real Genevieve, the cruel woman behind the pearls and the performance. The closing arguments were powerful on both sides. Caldwell painted Genevieve as a grieving widow doing her best in impossible circumstances. Martinez painted her as a calculating thief who'd betrayed her late husband's trust and stolen from his children. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of waiting, of second-guessing, of wondering if I'd done the right thing. Owen and I spent most of that time together, not talking much, just being present for each other. When the verdict came back, the courtroom was even more packed than before. The 4 women stood, and I held my breath. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of breach of fiduciary duty, we find the defendant guilty. The litany continued. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Genevieve's face went white, then red. She tried to stand, to speak, but her lawyers held her back. I watched the woman who tormented me for years realize that her carefully constructed world was over. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge was thorough and merciless. Full restitution of all stolen assets, substantial fines, prohibition from serving as executor or trustee of any estate, community service, and a suspended jail sentence hanging over her head like a sword. But beyond the legal penalties, there was something more. Charleston society, which had once embraced Genevieve, turned its back. The charities removed her from their boards. The social invitations stopped. The Vance name, once respected, was now associated with scandal and theft. In a city built on reputation and old money, she'd lost the only currency that mattered. The courthouse steps afterward were chaotic with reporters, but I was ready this time. "Do you feel vindicated?" one shouted. "I feel like justice was served," I said. My father deserved to have his legacy protected. His life's work deserved better than to be sold off in pieces for profit. "What about your stepmother? Do you forgive her?" I paused, considering the question. Forgiveness isn't about her. It's about me choosing not to carry her poison anymore. She'll have to live with what she did. I get to move forward. Owen stood beside me, and when a reporter asked him about testifying against his mother, his answer surprised me. "I testified for my father," he said simply, "and for the truth. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is the right thing." In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into a new project. I'd recovered most of my father's collection, the pieces Genevieve had sold. But instead of keeping them, instead of dividing them as inheritance, Owen and I made a different choice. We established the James Vance Memorial Foundation, dedicated to preserving historical artifacts and making them accessible to the public. The collection would be donated to museums, loaned to institutions, used for education and research. It's what Dad would have wanted, we both agreed. His passion had always been about preserving history for future generations, not about hoarding treasures for personal gain. The foundation's launch made the news too, but this time in a positive way. The same society pages that had covered the scandal now covered the redemption. The Vance name began to mean something good again, something connected to my father's true legacy rather than Genevieve's crimes. I stood in the gallery for the Foundation's first exhibition, surrounded by pieces my father had loved. His Georgian silver gleamed under museum lights. His Tang Dynasty bronze had a place of honor. Each piece had a placard telling its story, its provenance, and how James Vance had acquired it. His passion, his knowledge, his love of history was on display for everyone to see. Owen found me staring at a particular piece, a small Meissen figurine of a dancer. Dad had bought it for my 10th birthday because I'd been taking ballet lessons. "I remember this," Owen said softly. "You used to keep it on your dresser." "He told me it was from 1750, I said, "that it was made for a princess. He always made me feel like I was worth something precious." We stood there together, 2 children of James Vance, finally united in honoring him properly. "I'm sorry," Owen said, "for all those years, for not seeing, for not protecting you." I looked at my half-brother, this man I'd resented for so long, and found I didn't hate him anymore. We're both learning to do better. That's what matters now. As for Genevieve, I heard through the Charleston grapevine that she'd left the city, gone to live with a distant relative somewhere in Florida, unable to face the social exile she'd brought upon herself. The house, the estate, everything had been sold to pay restitution and fines. The woman who'd valued appearance and status above all else had lost both. I didn't feel triumphant about it. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt free. My apartment, once a refuge from the Vance estate, became truly mine. I decorated it with things I loved, not things chosen to impress or to fit some image. I pursued projects at work that excited me, not ones calculated to win approval. I started dating again, letting people see me, really see me, without the weight of family obligation and shame. And sometimes, late at night, I'd take out that piece of broken porcelain I'd picked up from Genevieve's floor. I'd kept it, a reminder. Not of the abuse, but of the moment I decided I was worth more than scraps. The moment I chose myself. 6 months after the trial, I was sitting on the small balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset over Charleston's skyline. The church steeples pierced the golden light, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the bells of St. Michael's ringing. This city, with all its beauty and its secrets, its grace and its cruelty, was still my home. But it no longer held me prisoner. My phone buzzed. A text from Owen. Foundation meeting next week. They want to discuss the new exhibition. I smiled and typed back, I'll be there. The woman who'd crawled through broken pieces to find her strength was gone. In her place was someone I was still getting to know, someone I was learning to like. Someone who understood that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, piece by piece, starting with your own sense of self-worth. I looked out at the city, at the approaching night, and thought about my father, about how he'd taught me to value history, to preserve what mattered, to look for the story behind every artifact. I'd spent my whole life learning to appraise objects, to determine their worth, to authenticate their origins. It had taken breaking apart to learn the most important appraisal of all, my own. The porcelain scar had hurt. It had torn through years of conditioning, ripped open wounds I'd been taught to hide. But it had also freed me. Sometimes you have to shatter before you can rebuild. Sometimes the breaking is what makes you whole. I touched the small piece of china I kept on my balcony table, feeling its sharp edge. Then I set it down and turned my face to the last light of day. Tomorrow, the foundation would announce a new scholarship program for young people interested in art history and preservation. Tomorrow, I had lunch with a colleague who might become something more. Tomorrow, Owen and I were visiting Dad's grave together, something we'd never done before. Tomorrow held so many possibilities that yesterday had tried to steal from me. But tonight, right now, I sat with the peace I'd fought so hard to find. The peace that comes from knowing you've faced your demons and won. Not because you destroyed them, though Genevieve had certainly been destroyed, but because you'd looked them in the eye and refused to blink first. Charleston's evening air wrapped around me, warm and gentle. Somewhere in the historic district, in houses like the one I'd grown up in, other people were sitting down to dinner. Other families were maintaining their facades, keeping their secrets, playing their roles. I sent up a silent wish for anyone trapped in those golden cages. May they find their breaking point. May they find their strength. May they learn, as I had, that sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is let everything shatter, then rebuild it on your own terms. The bells stopped ringing. The sun finished setting. The day ended the way all days do, giving way to night, to rest, to the promise of beginning again. I stood and went inside, closing the balcony door behind me. In the morning, I would wake up and be Eleanor Vance, not the shadow of someone else's expectations, but the architect of my own life, daughter of James Vance, sister to Owen, founder of a legacy that honored truth instead of hiding it. And that broken piece of porcelain? I decided to incorporate it into the foundation's logo, a reminder that what breaks us can also free us. That our scars tell the stories we need to remember. The apartment was quiet, filled with my choices, my peace, my hard-won joy. This was home. Not the mansion I'd left behind, but this space I'd claimed for myself. I was finally completely, undeniably free, and it was the most precious thing I'd ever possessed.